Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
I love the Yukon. I recommend you visit it at least once in your life. You can get there by plane, which is the fastest, by car from BC, which is the prettiest, I think, and by ship, including cruise ships that dock in Skagway, Alaska. And then it's a short trip over to the Yukon. That's the most adventurous. That's how the gold rush went in. I've had the good fortune in my life to visit Yukon all three ways. So lovely and pretty rugged and pretty natural. And if you're out there, it's a choice, I think, to be away from the big city. I mean, sure, they're high tech too. They're on cell phones and satellite phones and the internet and everything, but you can't get coverage everywhere without a satellite phone. And that's part of the point, I think, of the Yukon lifestyle. It's a bit more natural. If your idea of a good time is going to a Starbucks to take an Instagram photo of your cappuccino, you might not like the Yukon way. I haven't been there in the past year, but I bet they haven't got as caught up in the COVID-19 mania as the big cities have, because the mania is media driven, especially social media. And I think it's a big city thing, because in big cities, I think you're more afraid of strangers. You don't know everyone you meet. A small town, you're comfortable with people because you probably know them personally. Even in the biggest city there, Whitehorse. So just because Theresa Tam or some other politician in some press conference thousands of miles away tells you to panic about being close to people, if you know everyone in town, you're probably not going to take her advice. She's the stranger, not your neighbors in the small town. I just get the feeling that panic and mania are more of a big city thing than a country living thing. I tell you this because I think Jonas Smith, the Conservative Party candidate in the Yukon until he was fired yesterday, I think he's probably a pretty typical Yukoner. Here's how he describes himself on his own website. Jonas is professionally known in the Yukon as an advocate for the territory's responsible mining industry and for his volunteer work with the Every Student, Everyday Student Attendance charity, as well as his decades of experience in the hospitality industry and arts community. He's a third-generation Yukoner. He used to work for the premier there. I have to say, he looks and sounds like a pretty great candidate. He served on the Conservative Party's National Council, so he's no neophyte. In fact, and how painful must this have felt, in the last election federally in 2019, Jonas lost by just over 150 votes to the Liberal. So close. And that Liberal MP just announced he's retiring, so he's not running again this year. So I have to think that Jonas Smith had a pretty good chance of winning in the Yukon. He came within 1% of winning last time, and then when he's retiring, I think Jonas is the man to beat. But he was sacked yesterday by Erin O'Toole. O'Toole must have met him or at least dealt with him electronically since he was on the party's National Council. So what did this guy do or say that was so bad? Well, I'll tell you. Here's a story from the Yukon News. Yukon Conservative Party candidate booted from position due to vaccine views. Smith said he was told the reason for his disallowment was his opposition to calls for implementation of mandated workplace vaccinations and vaccine passport requirements in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. He phrased it really well, Jonas Smith did. At least I think he did. Listen, I believe in standing up for the rights of all minorities, including those of the unvaccinated, be it for medical, religious, or personal reasons, and that our country needs less discrimination, not more, continued Smith. Generations of Canadians have fought for our Section 15 charter rights, as well as freedom of choice when it comes to matters of bodily autonomy. And these proposed vaccination-related restrictions will vastly alter what kind of country our children will inherit, he said. Smith said mandatory vaccines will create a two-tiered society. Well, that's all true. And I think it's very well said. Now, here's the thing. There are no vaccine passports yet in Canadian law, at least not yet. Some universities have brought them in, though all the ones I've looked at so far have exemptions for medical reasons or other reasons too. The province of Quebec says it's going to bring in a vax passport, but they haven't filled out the details yet. It's not a thing yet. But there is no federal vax passport, nor a Yukon one. And even that control freak Theresa Tam hasn't called for one yet. and she's about as authoritarian as they come.
I think the public has to know this is one of the worst case scenarios in terms of an infectious disease outbreak, in that their cooperation is sought. If there are people who are non-compliant, there are definitely laws and public health powers that can quarantine people in mandatory settings. It's potential you could track people, put bracelets on their arms, have police and other setups to ensure quarantine is undertaken.
So there's no vaccine passport. Even the Liberals haven't called for one yet. They might well do so. I fear they will, but even they haven't had the audacity to do it yet. I bet they're going to wait till after the election's over. This thoughtful candidate for the Conservatives in the Yukon thoughtfully talks about protecting minorities and not segregating us as a society. And he's sacked from running as a Conservative candidate, just fired, told he's not in anymore, just done. Here's how Trudeau's CBC state broadcaster reported it. Conservatives drop Yukon candidate citing opposition to public health guidelines. A party spokesman says Smith doesn't support certain public health guidelines. But that's another CBC lie, isn't it? Because that's not what a vaccine passport is. It's not a guideline. It would be a rule, an order, a legal requirement. That's how the term is used. And you can see in Smith's comments, that's what he's worried about, the force of law, the forced outcome, segregation, discrimination, not guidelines. So what is Conservative Party policy on the question? Are they for vaccine passports? Are they for vaccine passports and also for banning criticism of vaccine passports? Or for vax passports and for banning criticism of them, and for banning even a discussion of them before the rules are even set? That's quite some ban. It's a ban about talking about bans. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.